We are at the last of the small business sessions today, which is pretty wild to believe. But before we get started, we just want to take a minute and thank all of you for your continued leadership and engagement and partnership in this work. Sloan and I wanted to give you all a round of applause and also give yourselves a round of applause for all the work you put in over the last 6 months. And we are really excited to transition with you into the next phase of the technical assistance hours, which is the opportunity, as we talked about, for you to get individualized coaching and advising from our speakers and from Race Forward. And our team is available to still support you in that work. In addition to the office hours we've got coming up, Sloan and I are available to join any of your cohort meetings, review drafts of the racial equity plans, or answer any questions as they arise. And we also just want to take a few minutes to share a new video that was put out by the Cleveland Fed. It's the importance of racial equity work and economic inclusion in strengthening our economy, which is the work that you are all leading. So I'm going to kick it over to Sloan to share that video, and then we'll get started with our great speakers and presentations today.
A canvas can't reach its full beauty without every piece in place. Each texture builds off of another, and each brushstroke has its space. Our economy's like a canvas, one that isn't fully clear, because we exclude vital pieces from its image every year. The Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland studies our economy. They found it can't reach full potential without racial equity. They track systemic proof that these disparities affect us all, and their program on economic inclusion shows where it's gone. Gender and race disparities hurt the economy we live in. Estimates of the labor gap could cost the economy trillions. People born in predominantly minority locations have lower access to wealth, and that ripples through generations. Education, secure jobs, high-quality housing, and credit. These disparities still stand from a racism that's systemic. It could be traced from employment to small businesses and wealth, and still exist today in ways that still damage our country's health. The more access to good work, the more our economy is stable. People can't participate if they're prevented or unable. Unless we have equal chances, change will only reach a handful, and these inequities will rear their heads in new ways. For example, the pandemic reduced employment in every ethnic group, but Black and Hispanic workers have harder journeys to recoup. What can we do when research shows that people struggle to advance? Our canvas won't reach full potential if we don't have equal chance to high-quality education and to labor opportunities, to economic inclusion in all our country's communities, so we can combat poverty and work at high potential and build wealth, change our trajectory, strive toward new life credentials, close the pay gap, set up generational wealth for new families, intervene so our economy can thrive where it is lacking. Take these broken and torn pieces and assemble something greater where we'd stand on equal ground, not racially divided craters, where a new image will form out of these disjointed statistics. It is possible, it's reachable, it's more than optimistic. Part of the Federal Reserve's mission is to maximize employment, and economic inclusion helps build this goal and deploy it. Their economists and analysts provide public with research from our region and our nation where these facts are found and featured. Our divided systems can assemble if we get involved. A greater understanding helps us face these issues till they're solved. Our economy can grow greater. For too long, it has been severed. Change can come, but only if we all put these pieces together.
All right, so we that came out from the Cleveland Fed last week, and we wanted to share it with you all because it really gets to the why behind why the Federal Reserve is engaged in this work, and the role that you all play in this program really contributes so substantively to our mission at the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia and along with our Federal Reserve Bank partners. So we just want to say thank you again. I'm not going to take too much more time. I will drop the link in the chat to the video if you're interested, and I will pass it on over to Sylvie to kick us off.
Great. Thanks, Sloan. That was awesome. Thanks for letting me follow up on that. So today is our last session, and it's about building equitable and sustainable local economies. So you'll hear about some case studies and principles from both Dr. Leon Caldwell, who's the founder and manager of Ujima, and James Johnson-Piett, who's the founder and CEO of Urbane. So without further ado, because I know they've got a lot to share, I'm going to kick it over to Dr. Caldwell.
Hello, everyone. Hope you are enjoying at least what I'm enjoying in Maryland, where I'm sitting now. It's 72-degree weather, and it's not bad for a fall day. I hope for those of you in the Midwest, you're not jealous in any way. But spring will be here soon. So I am glad to have this opportunity and invitation by the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia, where I'm a native. Just share some thoughts and a slide deck and hopefully some dialogue and really to applaud you all for engaging in this process. You know, as the video alluded to, I mean, we do have an opportunity to create more equitable systems. You know, there's a real taste in the country for it, despite, you know, I think what the media sometimes portrays. I also think there are willing partners like the Federal Reserve to put its money where its mouth is, and also bring in additional resources necessary in really in a collaborative way. And much of my work over the past 25 years has really been around building coalitions and collaborations and partnerships on equal footing. There's a kind of a continuum of how people get engaged, from really tokenism, benign neglect, to full engagement, and full engagement meaning there's a collaborative spirit and there's a co-design. And I think as you go forward, and some of the great work you're already doing, I just wanted to bring some of those issues to the forefront. And I have a piece that called Braided Alignment. And I wanted to kind of bring it into this conversation because, and I'm going to start to share my screen. What I've found in doing this work for some time is that there tends to be, you know, a fair amount of conversation on, you know, how initiatives get started, and we get really excited about getting them started. We really we use as much energy to think about, you know, how do we get that first meeting off the ground and start going through the process of forming, storming, and norming. And then it gets to, all right, now what? And what I actually wanted to anchor some of my time on, and some of the projects I'm working on in particular, and I've worked on in different parts of the country, is this notion of how do you sustain the reinvention, right? So if you talk about reinventing your cities, how do you sustain that reinvention? And I want to apply this concept of braided alignment, which was developed about 10, 15 years ago, to small business recovery efforts. So over the past few meetings, you've heard different speakers talk about either case studies, different things around equity, you know, your how to move the needle, if you will. But if you move the needle and it ticks back into the direction you don't want to go into, then we're almost repeating cycles that have really been, you know, part of the American system. But we think that there's an opportunity to move the needle and sustain that movement in ways in which the direction we wanted to go to. But we also think it's a way to really build new movements, if you will, and new movements that are going to move your communities in different ways. You know, I'm big on innovation with interventions. And one thing that's really clear is that we need to do different things. We also need to do the things we're doing differently, right? So there's two things to think about, like how do we, in this case of intervention or innovation, how do we do different things, but then how do we do the things we're doing differently? So there's just two things I wanted to just throw out. You'll hear on this presentation, like a lot of conceptual pieces. And the idea is that as the words come and the images come across in this presentation, I really would like you to think about and put the mental models of people in your community. Like who can you start to build this braid with as you hear more about what it is. Also wanted to make sure that the information you have is applicable. There's a lot that goes on, conceptually, but looking at how you take a concept and make it actionable. And you'll see in this presentation ways in which we can make these concepts more actionable. So without further ado, I'm going to go through the slides. I know James will be plugging in. I'm going to leave him some time as well. I was a college professor for a while, so I'm used to 3-hour lectures, but I got 30 minutes, so we'll put it in that 30-minute slot. So you will have access to me past this meeting. So if there's something that resonates and you don't get to it or you want to get back to, by all means, use your technical assistance time and space, and we can go deeper. But this is really to give you kind of a surface level perspective on sustaining the reinvention. So I want to talk a little bit about my company as one of these companies that does this. It's actually a holistic equitable development company, which is called Ujima Developers. And we focus on people, place, and progress. And what that means in terms of a holistic equitable development concept is we're really interested in what is optimal community health, and it requires really intention. And this intention is something that, in terms of investments, the recovery of small businesses in communities has to be intentional. It's not going to happen happenstance. And even thinking through, what do those companies look like? What do those small businesses look like in your community? So as a kind of a social impact real estate development company, I'm really interested in sustainable, healthy communities as like the big picture. And that requires not only the built environment, meaning the buildings in which we invest in, but also economic mobility strategies and health and well-being strategies. And we'll talk more about what those actually mean in the work. So our development concepts are really around innovation. And this is we want to sit in the intersection of kind of public health and real estate development, and these creative concepts that solve social challenges. So what this means is I'm currently working on a project in West Philly that is a vacant lot or 6 vacant lots, mixed-use building, and we're turning the lots into basically a healthy food truck port, which is called the Porch. And the building we're renovating will have a cafe, a community cafe, which will be run by returning citizens and seniors in the neighborhood. And we have 4 Black doctors actually are going to go into that space and have a medical practice. So the intentionality of not turning that corner, which easily could be a drive-through for a McDonald's or a KFC or Dunkin' Donuts, whatever it could have been. We have great intention of looking at what challenges does that investment solve for the community. And for us, that's part of this social impact work for holistic equitable development. I like this piece that comes from, we want regentrification, not gentrification. And we talk about this in our work as we want community transformation without gentrification. And those things can actually happen. You just have to have great intention to make it happen because there's models for it to actually happen. So our social impact processes during a pre-development period, we talk about this braided alignment, which we'll get into. There's also the development is co-design, and we focus on sustainability. These are all pieces, not just environmentally sustainable solutions, but solutions that sustain people. Excuse me. So this is where we get into the work. So, for a while I ran, I've always kind of had these academic centers that did community-based work. And I remember both in University in Nebraska when I was on faculty there, and University of Memphis and Rhodes College when I was on faculty there as well. Would do a lot of community-based work with mostly, youth serving agencies or nonprofits, some small businesses who were looking for workforce development. And what was really clear to me is that you rarely can go into a community and say that there's nothing going on, right? Like, it's kind of rare. Sometimes from the outside, it may not look like anything's going on because, the results aren't there or things that people want to do don't really pan out the way they do. So I actually started looking at this a few years ago when I tried to figure out, okay, there's a lot of resources in many of our communities, but for some reason, those resources aren't really either meeting the populations that they want to or really advancing the change that they really want to. Like, the mission statements say one thing, but what's actually happening on the ground is something totally different. Or the results or outcomes haven't really yielded what they thought they would yield. And we have a tendency to say, well, these people aren't getting anything done. This organization isn't doing that. And what I learned is that there's really well-meaning people in a lot of organizations, and I'm sure you've seen them. However, we've bit off a lot of the apple as individuals, individual organizations, even individual sectors. And the change we need, or the solutions that we're looking for, require like multivariate inputs, but we keep coming at them with univariate input, a singular silver bullet kind of thing, right? Which hasn't really worked. Data doesn't shows doesn't work. We know from just a purely organizational perspective, there's, we have more diversity, you have more pluralistic thoughts, then you actually have better outcomes. But when it comes to some of the community movements, when you think about the work you'll do post this convening, these set of convenings, it really setting these things up to be more than just one government agency, more than be just one nonprofit. And we typically go to places that like we feel comfortable with, we know the leader, and it becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy for that this one group is always going to get the grants or they're always going to get the contracts. We don't question what their work is. We don't look at their data. It becomes a problem because they're perpetual kind of feeding or eating from that same trough without questioning if in fact it's yielding the right results. Tends to be one of the greatest problems I see in a lot of systems, right? And particularly in government systems and nonprofit or foundations. So when I step back and you look at all this, you're thinking, all right, well, is it that nothing's happening, or what is happening is so misaligned that it could never actually, get to where you want to get? So this graphic shows that in most cities are like this, most places are like this. There's stuff happening. There's people moving, and they're moving in different directions. And sometimes some are moving faster than others. And, there's, the various sectors in the community might be moving, but they're not really aligned. They don't communicate with each other, right? And in many ways, it's often this, perception of competition, like we're all fighting over the same $500 grant or something like that, right? And the boundaries aren't clear. Like, what are you working on? Well, I don't know. What are you working on, right? And then it's always mission creep because a lot of times people are running after the same grants that may not actually be what they're set up to do. And then there's oftentimes an even unclear metric for outcomes or performance, right? So we don't really know how we're going to measure what we're doing or how we're getting there, but we just know we're working towards that goal or a goal, right? So this is how I see most communities set up. And having worked and tried to make some sense of why as an evaluator, think about why some things have not actually happened. It is not sometimes the lack of resources, although that's typically a case, but even when the resources are allocated, it's the alignment of resources that are actually problematic. So when you think about your work moving forward, asking a question of how your resources align to actually sustain the businesses, sustain the programs to recover small businesses, that's an important consideration. So then when you come in and some cities or some places look like this, well, yeah, we got everybody lined up. We have our we had this, we have one meeting and everybody sits in and we all sit and talk to each other. And then we think we have this collective impact statement ready to go, right? And with that, you see there's awareness of, general goals, right? But there's clear, firm boundaries, which create silos. Typically one-way communications, but post those meetings, folks don't really talk to each other. And they only collaborate when necessary. And that's, those forced marriages around getting funding. And then they're moving in some consistent direction, and sometimes you may actually need to pivot. And then it's oftentimes like the way this collective impact, where the resources are lined up, they're not real agile, that also creates a problem. And there's this coordination with one backbone organization, which there's not a matrix or a diffusion of power, if you will. So the one organization holds the power. So that has some limitations as well. And we're looking at, from going from misalignment to, some kind of collective alignment of organizations, but not necessarily resources. And then I think that also, in terms of being sustainable, creates a little bit of a challenge as well. So, I'll zip through this. I'll send you the slides as well. But you think about change through collective impact, like these 5 key conditions for shared success, like these all make a lot of sense, right? Like the intellectually make a lot of sense. However, there's something about how they're applied that we often fall off the rails with. And this is not to, have any issue with collective impact strategies, but there's something even beyond collective impact, or maybe even underneath a collective impact strategy, and which is the reason why I created this notion of having braided alignment. So I was really trying to figure out how to sustain innovation. And I was one day sitting, in the water, looking at a boat and watching a much larger boat get pulled by a smaller boat, and was thinking of one, just from the physics of water, right? But also thinking about the strength of that rope, that line that was pulling the boat. And I thought about why is that so strong that it could pull another boat? And that was a metaphor for me around the strength of a movement is really around the strength of the line. And that line is braided. It's the strongest line you get when it's actually braided. So that was my kind of metaphor. Now, okay, you may ask, what's a dude from West Philly talking about boats and stuff, right? We do have the Schuylkill in Philly, so I do see boats. But this whole idea of using what's in nature and using some of the tools we have around us as metaphors, right, for our own community movements is significant. So here's the 5 strands of braided alignment. It's inclusion, conceptual, policy, funding, and then implementation. And then this model, I kind of go through each of these with activities. So inclusion is really asking kind of who's at the table and who's not at the table, right? This is a project I was doing in Kansas City, Missouri, with the school district and the police department around trauma informed education. And we had to ask the question, we're talking about trauma, we're talking about students, we're talking about families. And, when somebody asked, well, who responds to trauma? And it was the police. And we're like, all right, well, how do we bring the police in so they can understand what's kind of happening and maybe diffuse issues versus, really go in line with their training of interdiction, as they call it. So they had to be at the table. So when you think about your sustaining your movements, right? Sustaining your recovery past the initial work, who else needs to be at the table? And then when you set that table, who's not at the table that you can think of? And we do this thing called network analysis, where you have to look at essentially the nodes around a movement and who's in the ecosystem. And then that supports this question of being inclusive in the conversation. Sustainability requires inclusion. The other part we really focus on is a kind of strand in the braid is conceptualization. We start with like what's in the mind, like design thinking stuff. We ask questions like, are you addressing the root cause, or is this just you're putting a Band-Aid over a symptom? And then what are the innovation opportunities, right? So this idea of having, conceptualizing the actual challenge. So for example, you may have talked about in your deliberations over the past few sessions that there's kind of small businesses are undercapitalized, right? And you, in that process, you would think, well, if we conceptualize this idea of being undercapitalized, what does that actually mean? How are small businesses undercapitalized? Is it the fact that they just can't get money, or why can't they get money? Is it the fact that there's lending challenges, right? There's issues with how the financial institutions are set up to actually fund small businesses, particularly small Black and brown businesses. Structural racism is a real thing. Like, how are your banks? What's your CDFIs doing in the community? How's the government, municipal government, actually stepping in to some extent for policy or practice? But the conceptualization of the problem is really critical. As you may know, it's often, sometimes you can get into conversations about, or in meetings, and you're talking about a thing, and by the time you leave, everybody agree that that's the thing to talk about, but yet they may define that thing totally different. So you have to start the conversation of like, what are we really talking about, right? Like, what is, so we're all on the same page, so we know we're solving the same problem, and our solutions are ones that are based on what we see as the real challenge. Policy is another strand. I mean, when I worked at the Casey Foundation in Baltimore, we used to have a saying that, bad policy trumps good programs every day. So really having some kind of policy analysis is really critical. And that's looking at what policies, both policies that promote and policies that compromise whatever your interventions are or your solutions are, right? And this is, you really can't sustain, I think policy is the most critical piece of sustaining long-term any solution. Then we talk about funding in this, essentially, how's it getting funded? Right? You have great ideas, but over time, as you know, the waning of funds or interest of funders, one has to think about what are our long-term strategies for funding? Who's going to fund? Who could be funded? How do we blend funding? What's your ROI, your return on investment, and what's the return on community, right? Both of those things can be monetized, but they both need to be discussed. We typically just discuss what's our ROI, return on investment and dollar amounts, but we rarely talk about what's our return on community. So if, in fact, communities are, over time, is there a health return, right? Is there a transportation return? Is there an education return? Like, those things should be thought of, not just does this program yield us a 12% ROI or cash on cash return, whatever it may be that you're using as your financial metric. And then finally, implementation. So you return to the network map, right? Who actually has the capacity to do the things you're doing or want to do? How can you invest in those needed capacities? These are, at the end of the day, you come with this great idea, is who actually is going to do it and who can do it over long periods of time. And more important, or just as important, who are the multiple people who can do it? And maybe there's a strategy around, well, we'll do it for 3 years, somebody else will do it for 4 years. We'll take all those learnings, and then everybody will be fed off of those learnings over time. Critical to the braid, and I know I have just a couple more minutes. One thing I acknowledge after doing this work for a very long time in communities is, and you may have heard this at some point, most people don't know the process of collaboration or collaborating or building coalitions. So you come in on your kumbaya moment, and then you think it's always going to be kumbaya, and in a minute it's not kumbaya. People freak out. Like, oh my God, this thing's horrible. I don't agree with this person anymore. This organization did this, and it just becomes like a issue of what people have the expectation that it's always going to go smoothly. The reality is, it's not. Never does. There's moments, it's cycles. If anybody's ever been in a relationship, you know how it goes, including with your kids. It just kind of goes up and down and it moves. And preparing your community for that, I think is critical. I talk about fraying, kinking, and knotting, right? These are, going back to my West Philly water analogy with the boat, fraying happens over time. It's natural wear and tear as systems change. That's just kind of part of it. It's gonna fray, right? Over time, things fray. Kinking is a result of moving either too rapidly within the system and not bringing everybody on board. But removing a kink is really a deliberate process. So you can do that with communication and attention to like the natural apprehension of change. Like, this is all around system change. And it does require like gentle movements within the ecosystem, right? Now, nodding is a little different. Like, nodding is when, you're confronting adaptive challenges with adaptive change. And it's a little hard. People just, you can get really tight, ideological tightness. There's just things that like, we always did it this way and we're never going to do it any different. Like, that's a pretty good knot, right? You have to think about like this knot. And knots shouldn't be catastrophized. It really should be understood. Like, is it an ideological knot? You're never going to change somebody from being racist, then do you really want to work with them, right? If you never want somebody being sexist, you have to ask, like, sometimes if you fish, sometimes you just cut bait, right? There's times when everybody in the relationship might not need to stay in a relationship if the movement is going to be sustained. I think that's something that, you have to make decisions on, but become aware of that this is part of the process. Right? It doesn't mean you have a bad idea. It doesn't mean that it can't be sustained. It's just, these are natural things that happen when you're trying to braid and bring communities together and for sustainability acts. So if you think about the interventions, the work that you'll come up with over the coming year or time you have together, this is kind of part of that process. I talk about these 6 I questions for community implementation. This is really for whether it's in business or any area. You should, you do inventory. Like, what do we have that already? What do we already have? Like, you ever go shopping and you buy 6 more things or the 5 things you already had, you never looked, saw what you had in the first place. You have to take an inventory of what's in your systems already, what's in your community, what's working now, what's not working. Right? That's the investigation piece. And when you do the investigation piece and find out what works, you also have to interrogate the data, right? Who is it working for, right? And you might find that for some parts of the community, it's working just great. For others, it's not. For some neighborhoods, it's working just great. But for other neighborhoods, it may not. And then you have to find out what's missing. That's the inquiry part. And then once you have it going, the iteration is how do you actually implement it, right? And then insights, the last part, and this is where you have to have some measurement. And measurement can be both qualitative and qualitative, quantitative and qualitative. So just thinking about it, you're asking the question, am I accomplishing the result I set out to accomplish over time? Again, I would also say most times we measure things in grant cycles, and that's not the best way to measure things. Systemic change takes a while, so you need to have like milestones and things in there. But these are just some quick ways to think about how these things move. Why is this work important, right? If you think about whether it's equitable development, absolutely having viable businesses, viable economic recovery, not just economic recovery, but strategies for economic mobility are critical to communities' movement, right? And the recovery of communities. So I'm going to actually stop sharing there. I think I'm at my 30 minutes. I'm sure James is around somewhere. Yeah.
That was awesome. Thank you. So just quick recap. I think what I'm going to say Dr. Caldwell, because you earned that PhD. Dr. Caldwell, reinforces when it comes to the success and sustainability of doing this type of work, there's a lot of pre-work and conceptualization and thinking that has to happen before getting started in terms of really ensuring there's alignment, that the policies and funding and that the collaboration out there and the coalitions are authentic. And I like this idea that you had of it's not just a public-private presence, because we know some people will just, do something for show, but is it really real and authentic and a real partnership? And then I like this idea too of the fraying, kinking, and nodding, and that basically what Dr. Caldwell was saying is you will run into problems. It's that you don't think you won't, you will, but that doesn't mean it won't be sustainable. And it's really about identifying, is it fraying, which is just the natural wear and tear? Is it kinking, which is, maybe you're moving too fast and you're skipping some steps, or is it, real change, like a COVID or something like that you got to adapt to. So, I think that I saw some comments, but I didn't see any questions. So I think I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to James, unless anyone has something burning right now, but otherwise we'll leave it till the end. All right, James, you're on.
All right. Thanks, Sylvie. And Dr. Caldwell, it's always a pleasure to partner with you on stuff. So great time pass. My name is James Johnson-Piett. I'm a principal and CEO of Urbane Development. And I'm going to try something a little bit different than what I usually do. You're going to see a lot of videos. So if I mess this up, I apologize in advance. There's some audio visuals happening here. So if you are eating your lunch, that's great, but make sure you're looking at the screen because it's a lot of visuals for you all to check out. So let's try the first one, which is my basic. Let's see if I get this right. Okay. My basic screen for my presentation. All right, so you need to see the full version. All right, are we full screen? Someone nod. All right, thank you. So again, my firm has been around for 14 years. I started in Philadelphia, where I grew up, but we've expanded to New York City and have offices in both places. We like to say we are builders of community wealth. We really focus on the infrastructure that's needed to create community wealth. So whether it's physical infrastructure in terms of buildings, could we do a development arm, if it's capital, sort of finding access points for capital for folks who are trying to build assets, whether those are small businesses or real estate or the myriad of other assets that can be created in someone's life. We also are
just a quick note. We still have it's not full screen. It still shows like your notes in the next slide.
Oh, cool. All right. Well, you see my stuff. Let's figure this part out. All right. I gotta figure this out. All right. Let's try something else. See, the tech is always getting you.
Display. Do you have display settings up on the top in the middle?
Yes. For this view. That better?
Yes. There you go.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Sylvie. I also just got off a red eye today, so I'm a little wonky. But anyway, as you can see, some of our metrics here, we really have focused on working with communities, particularly communities that tend to be historically disinvested in. We have worked in over 100 communities throughout US, Canada, and the Caribbean. We've raised a solid amount of money for community development projects, economic mobility projects, small business ventures since we started. Through our platforms, we work with over 1,000 small businesses, 1.4 million square feet of real estate. And we've, raised and catalyzed $150 million of development as a co-developer in place-based projects in New York and Philly. So I'm going to show my first video to give you a feel for what we do from the words of one of our clients and friends. So let's try this. Although I got to make sure I remember now, I have to share my sound as well as to share the screen. All right, see, I'm not going to mess this up. This is great. All right.
We are very proud of our Flatbush and Brooklyn roots. We have become a strong source of wellness and healing rooted in our sense of sovereignty, especially for Black, Indigenous, and Brown folks.
We work with clients to design their dreams. It's very important for young entrepreneurs to have the safety net, giving them the tools or access that they may not have had otherwise.
How can we integrate this idea of healing and wellness within the small business owners and small entrepreneurs, where we can add to the social change? What we find exciting is Urbane's holistic approach to business development, and not only financial wellness, but overall wellness of the people who own the business. Not only talking about the dollar and cents, but talking about human beings behind those dollars and cents. Makes me feel very hopeful as a small business owner and as a human.
So my favorite part of this video is the fact that it feels like a 70s commercial with the light jazz and the grainy video in place. But I wanted to share that with you because part of our platform around developing businesses, and frankly, what reason why I was asked to present today around building out local economies, is it all starts with, at least in my mind, if you're talking about local economy, you're talking about people. And whether you're a small business owner, you are an independent contractor, or a politician, whoever you fit in this space, you're a human and you're a person first. And I think, Leon was getting at this issue when it comes to sort of network effects and working with community. You got to make sure people are good where they are. And so tilling that soil that allows you to sort of be your best self is going to be really critical. And so, this was a sort of commercial of a client of ours called Minka Works out of Brooklyn. They have a wellness and healing collaborative space and a community network. So they offer up space for alternative and more traditional healers. So think of it like a WeWork for your psychotherapist and your Reiki healer and your tarot card reader all in one spot. And so what they created is something that we call our community anchors. They're spaces that are trusted. They're spaces that are sticky and resilient, and people tend to go to them for refuge. And so those independent practitioners who are in that space are our community, and they're bartering and sharing, and knowledge transfer is happening in the facility, and supporting them both as entrepreneurs to find them capital and get them better services, et cetera, is a key part of what we do. But the other part of it is absolutely allowing them to be their best selves and figuring out what's going to make them frankly more whole. So I think the first thing, if I can impart anything to you guys when we're thinking about local economies, is making sure people are good and all the other elements that come along in their lives, because they can't be good entrepreneurs if they can't, frankly, deal with the sort of Maslow's sort of hierarchy of needs. Those are things that are super important to their ability to sort of grow and go forward. So let's see, next slide. So I'm going to do 3 case studies for you guys. So Leon kind of gave you a great framework for thinking about what it looks like to build local economies in a more holistic and equitable way. I'm going to talk about 3 examples of it happening in space that I think were really interesting. One is one that we've been catalyzing for the last 7 years in one of our developments, and some of the other 2 were just really interesting sort of concepts that are kind of out there. So this one's a Brooklyn example. What you're seeing in front of you is our tapestry of entrepreneurs. We run a Caribbean marketplace that is formerly a public market that was run by the city of New York. As part of the redevelopment of the space, we took it over about 4.5 years ago. And we have 30 plus Caribbean entrepreneurs who've been on a really wild journey. And so Leon mentioned gentrification. Obviously, New York and Brooklyn particularly has been dealing with that quite a bit. The neighborhood that we're focused on in Flatbush, Brooklyn, has been a historically Caribbean community for a long time, particularly Afro-Caribbean. But at the same time, it is 2 blocks south of a really prominent park space, and has gotten a lot more popular. And so it's dealing with some of those gentrification pressures. And so figuring out how to preserve a classic Caribbean marketplace and space with the entrepreneurs that are in place was really the opportunity, but also the challenge that we've been working on for the last, almost a decade at this point. So I'm going to walk you through sort of the history of the project. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move over to another screen to do this right. Okay, and then I'm going to switch screens. I get this right. I really do feel like a Luddite today, but I promise I'll get this right. Here we go. Okay, do you see Instagram in front of you? Somebody give me a nod.
We do. Looks great.
All right, awesome. So this is our Instagram. So one thing that I'll definitely impart you around like the digital sort of frontier when it comes to community building. COVID has made it not just a must-have, but really a non-negotiable when it comes to thinking about commerce and community building. So what we had to do in a project that's been 7 years old is frankly remind people of what this was in the first place, why we engaged in this project, what they frankly agreed upon during the public process. All these elements were things we had to sort of remind people of as we moved through the development. So this was the original marketplace that was around for 20 plus years. It was started by the first Caribbean councilwoman who was frankly creating a marketplace for informal Caribbean vendors who were on the street during the Giuliani administration. They were being harassed by the police, and she offered up, frankly, a refuge and frankly a welcoming center that was fairly Caribbean. So not just for the Caribbean vendors, but also for new Caribbean immigrants that were coming into Brooklyn. They just really get sorted and figure out kind of where they could kind of get their resources sort of branched out to. Typical sort of flea market with a little bit of food elements in place. We're going to really focus on Caribbean, West African, and South American vendors, all manner of goods being sold in place. But we tore the building down. So in 2013, the opportunity came to sort of think about affordable housing, and I'll talk about the development piece of this in a second. But what's been really interesting about this project is, it truly was a labor of love in trying to figure out how to preserve existing entrepreneurs in a neighborhood while also building a completely new set of infrastructures physically in the space. This is frankly incorrect, but we did join the team in 2014, and we were running a space. We basically rented out an old furniture store and retrofitted it to put the vendors in while we were developing the new building. We've kept the rents the same. So one interesting thing as a tidbit point around equitable entrepreneurship is, essentially the specter of creeping rents in the gentrified space. We've decided to, for our legacy vendors, create a legacy rent structure where they have the same rent from when they left. And so essentially we've offered them up commercial rent control, and we've also offered them the opportunity to pass that legacy down to the next of kin. So we have succession planning baked into it. I didn't mention this ahead of time, but the median age of our vendors is 63. So we have a lot of elderpreneurs in our space, and the opportunity to think about generational wealth through the business and being able to pass that to the next generation, whether it's kin or not kin at this point, was really important for us as part of the project. We spend a lot of time thinking about business supports and resources. So we created our own business development course. One thing that we realized really quickly was the existing business courses that were out there were not sort of tactile. They weren't really focused on the experience of running a physical space or running a virtual space to some extent. They were very much classroom based. And so we wanted to mix the more traditional classroom based structures with the ability to be able to engage a business in real time in their facility and really make the lesson come alive in terms of the things they're doing in their actual booths and stalls and in their business itself. So this is a new rendering of the new building. I'll show you the actual final product in a sec. But we have been talking about this concept for a long time and sort of marrying the old and the new, the legacy with the new frontier. So we were really excited. But if you can see on the side, our Instagram feed, what's been really interesting and exciting is sort of getting the feedback from folks and just reminding them of what this is all about. So building community in all the ways that we think are interesting and really, really important going forward. So I'm going to stop sharing again and then reshare. We could do this right. I'm going to reshare. I think it's this one. And Sylvie, help me if I mess this up again.
I will.
All right. So this.
Looks like you need to do what you did before.
Okay. I'll get it right before we're done. Yeah?
It didn't change very much. That's weird.
Okay. It says paused. Oh, that's weird. Let me stop and start again. Yeah, I'm sorry, guys. See, I was trying something. Messing the game up. All right. What about this? Did that work?
Yes, that worked.
Awesome. All right. So moving on. So the first case study is our Flatbush Central project. So as you can see here, the development itself is pretty interesting. What we really pitched to the city was how can you sort of get the affordable housing that you want? So make sure that the sort of, again, that Maslow sort of hierarchy of needs are met in the shelter context, but really preserve the infrastructure that makes this place special, which is the Caribbean-ness of the neighborhood, right? And so in this case, we're talking about 255 units of 100% affordable housing. We have 18,000 square feet of commercial and community facility space, including the marketplace that's going back into the facility. We have the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is a local Caribbean trade chamber on the second floor with their sort of trade center going in that place as well. We have 9,000 square feet of market rate retail, but we've also built in a lot of incubator infrastructure. So this is the one piece that we were around the local economy element. How can you leverage the diaspora development with product going out to the Caribbean and other diaspora markets like a Lagos or Miami or Toronto, et cetera, but also be able to craft, and this is really important around thinking about local economies in the current context around supply chain. How can you create goods and services without having to go very far? So being able to tackle both. So we built in a ton of built environment, and I'll get to this in a bit, but you can see our bars, you can see a food hall coming into light. We have 3 different production spaces for manufacturing. So we have a shared kitchen for food manufacturing and food production. We have a really novel concept for a body care lab. So we're going to have a space for cosmetic supplements and other sort of non-food based but food grade production and development of products in that space. Then we have our tech and flex lab. So we have a ton of AV. So if you basically want to be on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, there's cameras everywhere. There's audio, video equipment that can be edited. We have a podcasting booth. And we have a really cool fab lab. So we have a fabric wall. You can come in and knock some stuff out. So for us, we really want to be a one-stop shop for Caribbean culture and commerce. We want people to come into the space and be able to learn about wealth creation through the business, learn about opportunities to be able to grow and scale, to be able to invest in businesses and invest in other things in the community through this space, and really be that community anchor that I spoke about earlier as the leverage point for wealth creation opportunities in the community, right? So the building itself as being a fulcrum for that. Our bread and butter is small business advisory and development. So really getting into that one-on-one technical assistance with the business, giving them really strong and pointed information, whether it's data and analytics, all the way through to sort of help merchandising and marketing, just doing all the things to make the businesses sort of strong at the direct level, but then also thinking about partnerships. So we have a ton of partnerships, and this is going to be important for any kind of conferences you're doing, whether it's the chamber. The city of New York has a really great product called Love Your Local. So they have an assessment package where they'll basically assess the business. And if they go through the assessment point, they're able to get some grants to support part of their fit out or part of sort of their operations if they go through this sort of almost credit enhancement process through a technical assistance advisor. We're one of the advisors for Brooklyn and the Bronx. And also we have a myriad of capital providers at various scales. So from a micro loan that you might need all the way up to, for significant capital, we can sort of outfit folks for that. I mentioned before we created a curriculum that was really experiential and tactile. The other thing I didn't mention is it was very much focused on trauma-informed sort of experience. And so making sure that the curriculum itself was culturally appropriate and took into account the fact that lots of folks here, whether the trauma was poverty or the trauma was something like an earthquake in case of, our Haitian vendors, being displaced, et cetera. These are things that are imbued in their experience as entrepreneurs, and making sure the curriculum was marrying up with that was important for us. So we piloted 3 cohorts over the last year. We felt like it was fairly successful. We're going to really ramp it up when we move to the new space and bring new entrepreneurs in for that same experience. We also we had a UBI product. So if you are into universal basic income, we raised about $50,000 for our vendors during COVID just to get them through when we had to close. We were closed for 6 months in New York. So basically we just raised some money to make sure they were going to be okay. So I mentioned before in the video, a lot of small business sort of development is just making sure people are okay. They have to trust you. They have to think, even though we're their landlord, we're also, we're people too. And we want to make sure that they understand that relationship sort of, it's not a binary. It definitely is, to Leon's point, it is braided. So So we'll move forward here. So for us, the future is interesting. So this is a picture from maybe 3 months ago. So we're about to move into our new space in, knock on wood, 4.5 weeks. We are having all the problems with supply chain, but we're excited to get in there. Like I said before, this is really about circular economy. We're really trying to create infrastructure where you can pretty much do almost anything in this space, and it sort of creates a great feedback loop. So two of the initiatives that I think are really important for you all to think about in the digital age is 100% e-commerce. So we accelerate our e-commerce platform. If you go to shop.flatbushcatonmarket.com, I'll put it in the chat after I'm finished talking, you can buy a curated set of our products from our 30 vendors on that site. And so we act as basically the middleman. We run the e-commerce site, we select the items, we basically run all the transactions for them, and we give people, for no cost, and we get them that's what they need. We also run basically a procurement brokerage. So we have bigger buyers who want to buy bigger allotments of products. So we work with a group called Uncommon Goods. If you ever shopped like at Etsy, they're basically a better, cooler Etsy. Go to Uncommon Goods, they're really big. So they buy a lot of our pilons, which is a mortar and pestle product. They buy some other Caribbean. So there's a really great diaspora doll that one of our vendors makes. That's a really appointed small doll that's just seasonally. And so they buy things like that. We have relationships with Brooklyn Museum, several restaurants, several other retailers where we'll basically act as the broker for businesses to be able to sort of produce at the wholesale level for retailers that are in the neighborhood. And then we run a SUSU, so something akin to a sort of internal circle lending product where our vendors are able to have a vendor committee, and then they vote on who gets products, and it's an inventory product. So essentially we have up to $5,000 for a vendor to buy inventory, and the other vendors are their credit committee. And so we sort of seeded that fund, and that fund's been revolving for the last 3 years. And then finally for our project, what's next? So when we move into the space, we're really excited about this part, transitioning our sort of work beyond just the small business owner community into the community at large. So talking about community wealth building at scale. So not just businesses as an asset, but thinking about the full myriad of assets that a community can invest in a space like ours and throughout the community itself. So whether it's real estate or land, whether it's things like, you'll be surprised. I just did an event with the Brooklyn Nets last week with some high school kids. And I asked them about how many folks had a bank account. I had 2 kids raise their hands. I said, how many folks own Bitcoin? 14 raised their hands. They bought it through Cash App. They don't have bank accounts. They're trying to figure out what crypto looks like. So I'm like, the new divide around what's moving the kids these days, wholly different sort of set of economics. So being able to make sure when you walk into that space, you learn about investment and wealth in the new economy and maybe the old one too. But again, utilizing this space as a community anchor is our fundamental principle here. So I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm gonna start talking faster. So project number 2 is Detroit. So we've done a ton of work in Detroit over the last 10 years. Really, really excited about continuing to do that work. This project was really interesting because if you've heard of UNESCO, it's the UN. Oh God, I'm actually going to butcher it, but it's basically one of the UN agencies that focuses on culture and environment, and they have a designation called the City of Design. So Detroit in 2015 was designated the first city of design in North America. And when you're part of that sort of cultural cities network, you're tasked to come up with a plan for your designation. And usually it's an economic one. And so in this case, they were asked to figure out what's the economic plan for design in the city of Detroit. So we were hired to help them figure this out. And one of the things they wanted to figure out was how can we create an economy focused on our strengths? And one of the biggest things that's a key strength in Detroit is design. So we had to define what it was. And part of what we want to get at here is using an evidence base as a starting point that might be more quantitative, that moves into more of a qualitative and experiential sort of opportunity to execute on, but you're starting with some basics when it comes to the data. So we spend a lot of time measuring the economy in Detroit when it comes to design, both at the primary level, so looking at what industries and what occupations were directly related to design, and then the myriad of things that connect to design, because it really is everywhere, right? When you think about what design is, you could pretty much shove almost any industry in it from a adjacency perspective. So that was really, really cool. So we had to really think about what the canon of design takes as what's inclusive, which is usually about looking at the full spectrum of human diversity and experiences in the design solution. And so the first iteration of inclusive design was very much about accessibility. Like essentially, could you design a shirt that was equally accessible and usable and functional for someone who didn't have arms, right? Like, and you think about that in the same context. Well, if you have an elderly person who lives in a poor neighborhood, is the cafe you build and design equally accessible and equally functional and equally beautiful to her versus somebody who might be of greater means economically, but by no means anywhere else. So that ethos came to bear in terms of the concept here. And it really was thinking about, well, how do you take a thing like a designation from UNESCO and make it into an actionable plan that shows up in space? So, it really was a confluence of players. You had public-private coalitions with corporations, higher education, government, industry practitioners, community, all working together to create this action plan. We were the consultant that had to pull it together, and we were asked to really think about measuring that design economy, socializing the idea that inclusive design within the community and the public realm, and then IDing the critical points of focus. So for us, it really was talent and investment and policy. So those three things moving you to action. How do you attract and spur talent in a place? How do you drive investment to that talent? And then how do you build the policies to really make the whole place really work in context? So this was, a cut sheet from one of our graphics that we put together and sort of talked about the core design economy, what the occupations were, how many jobs were set up, et cetera. Fundamentally, this is very much about how do you create an evidence base to rally people to action, right? And people tend to like lists and they tend to like numbers and they tend to like graphics, especially if they can figure out where they fit. So for us, design represented 1% of the industries in Detroit, 5% of the occupations, but it was up to 20% of Detroit's economy between the primary core and the secondary tentacles that touched out to that. The other thing that's really interesting about the data that was helpful was how do you use data to create district identity? So in this case, what was Detroit going to be known for? Commercial and industrial design, the making of products, was something that Detroit's been doing for a decade plus, whether those products are cars. Think about all the trends, whether it's the automobile industry, mid-century modern is a Detroit thing, both in terms of the house and the furniture. Those are all coming out of the design ethos in Detroit. And so taking that, measuring it, and realizing that from a location quotient perspective, Detroit had the highest concentration of those designers in the country. And so that was an opportunity to say, as a city of design, we have the talent to be able to make it happen. The question is going to be who that talent is. So do they represent the city's population? Are the firms located in the city proper? And in both cases, the answer was no. So how do you sort of keep the talent that's already there, and how you repatriate the talent that's someplace else? So Detroiters are doing great things across the country. The Black and brown Detroiters that grew up in the city but then moved because they couldn't keep a job because most of the jobs went out to the burbs, or frankly, they were being hired by folks who were, international or national firms getting cheap labor in the city. So they started migrating out. So part of the solution point was thinking about this big and small. So I'm super fascinated by this. I'm going to play this video first and then get into the weeds around the other pieces of it. But this is a really fascinating opportunity for folks.
My name is Dwayne Edwards. I'm the founder of Pencil Design Academy and now the founder of Pencil Lewis College of Business and Design. Grew up in Inglewood, California, born with the gift to draw anything I could see. Being the youngest of 6 kids raised by a single parent, college really wasn't an option for me. But I ended up getting a job at the age of 19 as a professional footwear designer. So 32 years later, I guess it worked out after all. So Pencil is a free professional development academy. Just finding passionate kids who had an interest and a desire to be in the footwear industry. We ultimately start to become the pipeline for the entire footwear industry, looking for future talent, to the point of well over 500 of our kids are working professionally in the industry at big brands such as Nike and Jordan, Adidas. They can actually select the students based on how they would work at that organization. In 2020, I've discovered this brilliant woman by the name of Violet T. Lewis, who founded an HBCU in 1928, specifically to help women. her then moving to Detroit to further, advance to college, and then ultimately the college becoming an HBCU in 1987, for us, that was the connection point. It was, how could we look at resurrecting a college that for 85 years did so many amazing things for the city of Detroit? And so what we're looking to do is be the first HBCU to ever reopen. So none of this would have happened without some amazing founding partners. One being one of the best design schools in the nation, College for Creative Studies. The second one is Target, in my opinion, one of the most innovative retailers. The partnership with the Gilbert Family Foundation, specifically with Jennifer and Dan, really introduces us to the community of Detroit. And we want to enhance, what they've started and then how we can actually contribute to elevate it even further. 5 to 10 to 15 years from now, I think we'll look back on this moment as a pivotal point. And for that to actually happen here in the city of Detroit is something I'm looking forward to bringing to the planet. I think it elevates the HBCU community, but it really expands the consciousness of what's possible, specifically here in the Midwest. Thank you for welcoming me and my family to the city. Man, it's great to be back. It's great to be back.
So what I've really, really loved about this was you had an action plan that was occurring basically 5-6 years ago, and a group of folks, like he mentioned in that video, really a coalition. So I mentioned sort of, the sort of idea, the sort of, again, braided infrastructure and sort of this is where the red eyes are getting me, collective impact model, where you're having all the different folks coming together to figure out how to come together to create this impact piece, was happening through this plan, right? And so attracting Dwayne, creating the Pencil College, which is coming online hopefully next year, but partnering with College of Creative Studies, Target, Dan and Jennifer Gilbert, really thinking about big swings for a place that obviously still really needs it in a lot of ways, but really being innovative and creative about the strength of the place. So again, talking about that product design as a driver for this kind of opportunity, reinventing the HBCU context is really, really something that was exciting, and that came from this sort of initial coalition point, which was really awesome. In addition to this, they have several initiatives that I think are equally interesting for you guys to think about. They have a commerce design grant product that really focuses on commercial corridors. So if you have a corridor of storefronts, thinking about how to create design excellence in those spaces that makes both the store owner be able to execute that innovative design while enhancing that patron experience and impacting the bottom line. They've created both the grant product and they've created a sort of certification best practice on how to get it done. So they've worked with the Urban Manufacturers Alliance on the manufacturing side, and then they've also done it on, again, that storefront retail side of it, which is really great. The Design Jam program, they are a product design and development series that attracts, again, industrial and product designers and pairs them with community stakeholders to prototype inclusive community purpose-built products. So, a park bench that can work really well, or thinking about how the new counter space in a cafe can make sense. So designers really learning a different canon around how to produce their products that's focused on community versus being focused on what they think is canonically beautiful. And then there's another product, I'll do one more video for you, which is their design challenge, the community tech hub model, which I really, really like, thinking about how you can create tech hubs that are community driven and solve for community problems.
So AGI Construction is a general contracting minority firm located in Detroit, and we prioritize equitable development projects. When the market fell out in 2009, we had to survive. So we've adapted to the hostile market. And so from there, we did property management services into residential, and we grew into commercial to today, which is a passion to build equitable projects. Projects we prioritize is working with schools, churches, nonprofits, small business owners.
We've got two roughly $20 million projects right here off the Verner Highway, which is our main strip. And there's just so much change and development that's happening. And so we figured that the hub would be a good space to really give people an opportunity to get involved and see the projects before they're even maybe announced. So there's some projects that people are talking about and planning for. And oftentimes we find out about the projects 2 weeks before, 3 weeks out, a month, and that just doesn't give you enough time to prep and prepare for what's coming. We're really hoping to give people the opportunities and also expose the community to what's going on in development all around us.
And so that process and all of the information that we collected over the 3 years really shaped and formed the outcome of creating an incubator space for minority contractors. And then also like a think tank space where local residents could engage in the development process. Create, hopefully we're able to forge private partnerships where we can kind of engage with the residents around how do we create solutions with them and for them.
Okay, I'm getting a 3-minute warning, so I'm gonna have to cut this one short. But I'll definitely, you'll get the links to this stuff, obviously. But what's interesting about this project is part of a series of hub space. In this case, it's a design build space where community can kind of come in, prototype their ideas, and make them actionable in community, which is really awesome. So,
anything that can
what
help
I think
us
was really fascinating about this space was, in all cases, you have this community really coming together, solving for community problems through design, which lent itself back to a larger sort of platform at the citywide level and at the regional level around how Detroit wanted to market itself. So marketing solutions at the community level became an ethos around how the city marketed itself nationally and internationally because of the designation. So connections between the global sort of commerce piece all the way down to the community engagement and community empowerment part, which was really awesome for us. Since I have 3 minutes, I'm going to whip through this. Philly, since we've been talking a lot about Philly, I will just skip right to the good stuff, which is a cool website that came out yesterday. So the reason why I had to turn my proposal and my presentation in last minute is because this got announced on Tuesday and the site went live on Wednesday. So instead of giving you guys a tour of it, I'll put the link in the chat so you can do it for yourself. But what it holds is really an opportunity for a digital one-stop shop for BIPOC entrepreneurs. The project has really been evolving over time. So this first phase has been a year's long worth of research, again, in storytelling. So letting entrepreneurs be their own voice around their own problems and solution building instead of it being someone else taking that work on. But the navigator itself, this storytelling platform will become an actual resource navigator and connector. So a place where entrepreneurs can find each other, can find those resources around capital, around technical assistance, around mentorship and networking. What we heard from entrepreneurs and businesses of color throughout Philadelphia is that they didn't have a central place to find the things they needed. And so this hopefully is going to be infrastructure that can be useful for that and really building community in the digital realm that passes itself off into the physical realm as well. But I'll put the link in the chat. It's builtbyphilly.org. You can play around with the site. It's really cool. A ton of videos on that as well. So just leave it with this. I think the takeaways for me definitely is a relationships matter. You need a coalition of the willing, because bottom line, whatever you're trying to come up with, frankly, it's not going to be 1,000 people doing the work. It's going to be a group of people that's going to be really important and strong that probably come from different sectors and different industries that can think about a larger opportunity point, but you need to find those champions that are going to really move this needle from front to back and then bring it back down to the community when appropriate. So having the different levels of engagement, both at the sort of tactical level, but also at the more storytelling strategic level. That second piece is small businesses are local. End of the day, everybody wants the national reach, the global reach, but you got to make the home front solid. The capital access, the regulatory environment, the talent pool, the market penetration points, and frankly, like I said before, the humanistic elements of where these people work have to be strong and have to be solidified. And that the tilling of the soil needs to be right for folks to take on to grow. Lastly, storytelling is critical. You need to have a clear message about your local economy needs. Like Detroit did a great job saying, we're a design city. Here's how we're going to solve a design problem. We're all about design excellence. It's a very clear and crisp message, and you can make that work however you want to play it. So whether it's diaspora development in terms of POC stuff in Brooklyn, or whether it's peer networking in Philly and talking about how BIPOC businesses need a place to sort of live and grow and play, you got to have that story And I'd say, as a parenthetical, like I'm getting comfortable with digital. So you are my guinea pigs. I am, I think we all have to get a little more comfortable with digital as sort of digital first platforming, or at least sidecar to, the IRL, the in real life experience that we have to have as well. So I'm probably a little bit over time, but thank you. I appreciate the time and happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. Thanks, James. Love the videos. That was great. So you gave the takeaways, I think just a couple things, and I'm very excited to see the Built by Philly, because I was actually, when I was acting Commerce Director, I was one of the clients for that. So it's great to see that come out. So I think just a few things. When I spoke to James about presenting, I said, can you give a couple examples? And the market example in Flatbush has probably like 18 examples in one example, which is great. Just an example of, one program that has a ton of different wraparound offerings and programs within it to really ensure the success and sustainability of the effort. And also just shows just how much work it is, years and years and years of work. And then the Detroit example, I think for all of you as cities, just thinking about creating that sort of cluster or specialization, or the way you market your city, that ends up creating an ecosystem that really strengthens businesses and your ecosystem. So where is my buddy Ken Evans? Because Ken, you take the prize for questions, and I think I'm just going to hand it over to you because you've got a few. I'm just going to let you ask directly if you're all right with that.
Yeah, that's fine. And very quickly, if they provide you with some of the questions and things that I asked, we can follow up offline, hopefully. But probably my most pressing question is, are these groups getting not only a local reach, but a national reach and maybe even a global reach as well, whether it's the design group or the Caribbean market?
So I'd say yes and no. So I'd say the yes side of it, definitely on the Detroit side, because it's part of an international network. They literally go to UNESCO events every year, even during COVID, and they share with the 36 other creative cities. So whether, I have a picture actually of all the creative cities. So there's actually a city of gastronomy, a city of film, et cetera, et cetera. They're heritage cities. So there's an international network of folks that Detroit gets to go in front of, and they frankly do it almost like a World's Fair of stuff. So they bring all the things they're working on in their local place and present it to the other network of folks internationally. They create networks, they share the knowledge transfer that's there. So that's really awesome. And then on the individual project front, a few of their projects have actually gotten really a lot of notoriety. That commerce design program actually got taken by Montreal and a few other places, and they replicated that work there as well. So they've done some really good work on that front. What I didn't talk about was the initial part of the plan in Detroit, where 50 community projects that focused on inclusive design. And many of those organizations on their own, outside of the network of UNESCO, have made their own connection points to folks both nationally and internationally as well. There's a big group called the Detroit Justice Center that's doing some amazing work around thinking about a world without policing and a world without incarceration. And so really thinking about the physical spaces of how do you do reparative justice. And so they've moved a lot of concepts through that space, and they're part of this network. But they just do their own thing. So they have a network nationally of folks who are thinking about the new spaces that are reparative in terms of justice. So there's lots of really interesting things where design can really hit the mark. The Caribbean marketplace, that appeal is going to be definitely focusing on how do you think about that's why I mentioned supply chain. Our biggest opportunity points are our diaspora cities. So New York City is obviously a hub for that. We get even during COVID, we get a ton of folks from other Caribbean cities. So the Miami's, even some of the small ones like Hartford, who folks come down. Oh, Hartford line? I love Hartford. Listen, the mayor of Hartford is one of my best friends from high school. So I got nothing but love for Hartford. There's a huge Caribbean community.
Hartford. We got a huge Caribbean community.
Exactly, huge community on what's the Ave? It's started with an A. It's in North Hartford though. But the best, listen, I had the best jerk pork and the best patties in Hartford. I'll say they're over Brooklyn, 100%. But anyway, these both types of city, you're seeing this sort of crosstalk, right? Between entrepreneurs, between product and services. That's really where we've been focused on with the Caribbean marketplace. I think there's opportunities to play in that space. The next frontier is then how do I break through, the Torontos, the Londons, the Lagos, and make that work. But COVID's been an interesting interesting mistress on that front. But it's forced some of our vendors 100% jumped into the digital stuff. Many of them have been kicking and screaming into it. That's why we jumped in and ended up being a middleman, to be frank, because it was like, we're not going to survive being closed for 6 months if we don't do something. And I'm not sitting there saying we made a ton of money on the e-commerce. We didn't. But we needed to start building infrastructure in place so that everybody got more vested in sort of thinking about it being more omni-channel. You could walk in the store, you could buy it online, you could buy it on IG. Like like whatever you're trying to do, you had a channel to be able to get it.
Awesome. There was a question. I'm not sure if everybody was clear. James, Timothy asked for the market, if you're the developer, what your role is.
Yeah, so we are many roles. We're a co-developer. We have a very small sliver percentage of the deal, which will probably be diluted at some point soon. But nonetheless, we got that. We certainly got a fee as part of that as well. We are the commercial broker of record. So a lot of the brokerage spaces on the ground floor are ours in terms of programming and leasing up. We run the marketplace. So we are the market operator. And so as joint venture partner in the building, we are also the owner of the market with our JV. And then we contract ourselves to run the marketplace as a market manager. So there are lots of tentacles in this piece, but yes, we were the developer on that. We raised a lot of money for it. And we are certainly going to be on the hook for some stuff. So we've been around since the RFP came out for this, but we are part of a joint venture. So the Caribbean Chamber of Commerce and Industry is another joint venture partner, and then BRP Development and Companies, they're the master developer, so they're our big brother for sure. And we definitely talk about it being all Black everything, because everybody we just talked about is Black, Black architect as well. So it's been a really cool project where we've had pretty good scale. It's 14 stories and it's pretty significant build, and you're seeing MBE companies all take the lead on getting it done. Long time though, 7 years, man. I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to be around for 7-8 years working on one thing. So it's been interesting to now see it a month away from actually getting open. But I will say this, we are getting hammered by supply chain. So if I can impart anything on you on my local economies, figure out how you can make the stuff you need where you are. Like, I know it's old school, but it is real. Like, we're waiting for things that are not going to come until February, March, April. They're on some boats someplace, and it's not going to get any better as much as we think it might. It's going to be gnarly.
So if folks have questions, raise your virtual hand, please. Ken, you had a question while I'm waiting to see if there's any other virtual hands about striking a balance between healthy appreciation for existing businesses versus gentrification concerns. I don't know if you wanted to elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, very quick. Yeah. Oh, yeah, very quickly, just to frame it. The reason why I asked that question is we here locally, and I'm sure it's other places, we want our residents, we want our businesses to not fear gentrification or even talk about it. We want them to focus on healthy appreciation and being part of the project, kind of like what you're doing here. So that's the reason why I was asking the question initially the way that I did for the Caribbean market.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's interesting too. I mean, part of the reason why I showed you the Instagram feed is because we built a building and the building was there for 20 years. And so whether you shop there or not, it was institutional in the physical sense. You got used to seeing that color as you walk by that corner. When it disappears, all of a sudden you feel a loss, even though, again, we would argue, like, when we did the analytics up front, it was like, people weren't shopping here. There's a reason why this is all converting and changing, but it didn't matter if they were shopping there or not. They felt like it was theirs and then it was erased. Even though we had to go through a 2-year public process in New York to build anything at scale like this. We had to get approved by 4 different public entities to get this thing built. So it's not like there wasn't a ton of public discourse, like in a very real way. It was not like we had public partners who were a part of this thing, both on the public sector side of it and not. So what's been really fascinating about this project is you have to constantly keep reminding people of the purpose of it and that it is different. We talked about development without displacement. You can have an argument about justification whether or not it as a concept economically is one that you want or not. But the real point for us is as entrepreneurial sort of developers, we want to create the engines of opportunity. We want to get the infrastructure built for opportunity, right? But who is it end up being for? And if you don't do all that sort of tilling of the soil, it doesn't matter, right? Someone's going to take advantage of it. So we wanted to be the folks that are already here that can build their assets up, So part of what we, made, whether it was a concession or whether it was, a thoughtful decision, we were like, this group needs to stay. So, I think I had my moments where I'm like, I should just let the market play itself out, right? But I do think it's a unique space because we have 65-year-old vendors in place. There's no other food hall like that. You can go to plenty of other places where you can get that sort of hipster, kitschy food experience. You can't get that thing, right? So I don't know. So it's been interesting in that way. But in terms of like creating the right sort of balance between sort of the upside and the existing, what I realized is that like no one's going to like you can't make everybody happy. Someone's always going to come at you, but at the same time, like track it, keep it running forward. I think at the end of the day, people get you get some good outcomes from it.
All right. Well, I think we are kind of at the end. Leon just left a message in the chat. If you're not at the table, you're on the menu, which is, I think, good closing words there. So thank you both, James, Leon, Dr. Caldwell, for your time. You're both extremely busy, so really appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this. This isn't the end for me. You guys are able to sign up for office hours. My first is on December 7th. And then there's also the other technical assistance. I'm sure Sloan or Allie, whoever I'm handing it over to, sorry, I don't remember at the end, will remind you of all the other things. So which of you do I hand it over to?
Yep, over to me today. Thank you so much, Sylvie. And thanks to Leon and James. Really appreciate you coming. That was such a strong close for our formal small business presentation portion of the program. So like Sylvie mentioned, Allie and I will be in touch with all of you, as we always are, to communicate about next steps and your ability to take advantage of coaching and advising from our racial equity trainers through to our small business trainers. And so we're looking forward to helping get you connected there and staying connected kind of as we go through the holidays. And then we'll pick back up again in February and March for the final wrap up. If there were any questions that happened today that we weren't able to get to or didn't get answered, please either drop them in the chat or shoot Allie or myself or Sylvie an email, and we can get you connected with James or Leon, and we can make sure to get your questions answered. But again, I just want to say congratulations. We are really moving through this, and it's so encouraging to see all of you here still showing up and really committed to the work that you're doing. So we will be in touch, and I hope you all have a fantastic holiday season.